Good morning. Some years ago I stumbled across a story of Father Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish Catholic priest, or actually a Franciscan friar, who was born at the end of the 19th century and lived through into World War II, where he was martyred. Father Kolbe became the head of his abbey, and there was a radio station and newspaper there, and he and other friars spoke out against the Nazi regime when they came to power and as that World War II began and Poland was invaded. They hid Jewish refugees and people, Jews escaping the Nazi regime in their abbey. They themselves were arrested and let go and arrested. They got into trouble from the law in many ways. Father Kolbe had the opportunity to sign a form which would formalise him as a German citizen based on his German ancestry, but he refused to have anything to do with the Nazi regime in Germany. He was later arrested, imprisoned and sent to Auschwitz concentration camp. And despite all the really significant things that he and other friars had done in opposing the Nazi regime and the persecutions, the horrors of World War II, it was in Auschwitz that he really grew in legend and fame and as a light in the deep darkness of that place. As a priest, he continued his work to bring consolation, comfort, hope and peace to the prison population there. He ministered to people however he could, giving much of himself and things he had to other prisoners. So much so the authorities hated him and he got into trouble quite often, was beaten and other things. One day in the camp, a member of his group, his block, escaped. And the prison authorities discovered this and were furious. They lined his block up and they were deprived of their evening meal. The next day, they were forced to stand out in the sun all day. The only respite was to get the meagre soup rations at lunch and then stand out again, and people succumbed to the heat and fell and were left where they were. They weren't allowed to leave their lines. And in the evening, when this escaped prisoner was still not found, the deputy commander, who was furious, decreed that 10 of these men would be taken to an underground bunker and starved to death as punishment and warning. And if it happened again, the next time it would be 20 men. And so the ranks were separated, and this deputy commander and his others walked through, noting numbers, drawing this ritual out in a painful, horrific way. Finally, the names of the men were read out. And when one man's name read, he wept uncontrollably. My wife, my children, my wife, my children. Father Kolbe was at the end, and he left his broke ranks and walked through. As he broke ranks and walked through, all the guards had their rifles at the ready and dogs ready to be released. They were ready to fire and shoot him for his insubordination or the threat he might pose. Nevertheless, Father Kolbe, with deep dignity and fearlessness, walked and stood at a respectful distance from the deputy commander. He acknowledged him with respect and dignity and made his request. Sir, I request that you release that man there and allow me to take his place. That man has a wife and children, a family. I have no one. Look at me. And he played on the Nazis' hatred and weakness. I'm older and weaker. He's young and strong. He'll do more for you. Let me take his place. Everyone in the camp expected this horrible deputy commander to actually say, well, if you want to die, you can join them too and you'll all die. But in that space, there was uncertainty and confusion and on the face of the deputy commander. He didn't know how to take this fearless, bold Catholic priest. He asked him, "Who are you?" "I'm a Catholic priest." And then he granted his request and allowed Father Kolbe to replace this man. It stunned the people. Everyone thought that Father Kolbe would be shot, or very least would be added to the number. They were stripped at the top, no point taking all their clothes down, only to carry them back up again. And naked they walked down into this empty underground bunker. There were other cells around them with other men dying for other crimes and punishments. It was a reeking, horrible, fetid place. It stunk, it was dank, it was cold. There was a cement floor, no furniture. There were buckets for their toilet. There were cries and from the other cells. And these men themselves were terrified of dying in this place, of not getting back home to their families. All were afraid and horrified and terrified, except Father Kolbe. And for the next days and weeks, he went around ministering to people. He was seen, witnesses saw with disbelief this man who was not shying away in fear and terror, but in calm, peaceful, even joyful at times, presence, bringing light into this horrible darkness. He ministered to each person, and beyond that to the other cells, because they could hear his praying. He heard confession. He prayed with them. He gave them words of hope and consolation and promise. He recited prayers and the rosary. He sang hymns, and people joined in. And by the end, there were people gathering around, and as they were able, they joined him in his prayer and his songs. So much so that they were so engrossed in what he was leading them in, that when the guards came in for their inspection, they had to scream out and yell out to get their attention. Father Kolbe enabled these men to experience something deeper and profound, this presence of God, and promised that God would hold them in their dying and beyond death, into this world, this hope that he believed in beyond. This presence of God would hold them, and the God of love and grace and justice would be theirs. And people died in peace. And when it came, it was 2 weeks afterwards, and the prisoners, the guards wanted the cell emptied. So they decreed that the 4 remaining prisoners, Father Kolbe and 3 others, would be killed with carbolic acid injections. When it came for him, he quietly and peacefully lifted his arm and allowed them to inject him. When one of the witnesses, one of the workers who was deployed there, had to work there, came into the prison to take the body, the others were lying on the ground with fear and uncertainty still on their faces from this time and the delay that it took for them to die. The pain was on their faces. Father Kolbe was sitting quietly against the wall, his body there, his eyes open, and a look of supreme joy and hope and wonder on his face. His dead body. Father Kolbe was proclaimed a saint, and when he was canonized, there amongst all the crowd was the man whose life he'd saved. He and his family at 82 years old. Father Kolbe exemplified deep and profound faith. And this week we look at Hebrews 11, that magnificent chapter on faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And it tells stories of people of faith, and this week it particularly names Abraham and Sarah. This couple who are called out of their home to journey to a place that'll take you, a new place, a place where your ancestors will call home. And your ancestors will be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. So pack up your flocks and herds and servants and maidservants and go. Where will we go, God? Just go in that direction and I'll tell you when you get there. And this extraordinary journey of faith. And the author of Hebrews, this letter, takes this story and adds to it and says, this is the promise for us. To journey into the unknown, to let go of what we have and what we cling to, our attachments, and trust in this God who is unseen, who can't be contained and defined and controlled, but who is love. Let go and have faith. And I think this is the faith that Father Kolbe and many others have exemplified. He can't see heaven, but he can. And he believes in this life beyond in God. So much so that it radiates out of him and fills the lives of others around him and fills this dark room with lightness and hope. And that's what the author of Hebrews is trying to say to these people. You've experienced this before. You've been drawn out of the circumstances of your life in faith. And now you're facing hardship and temptation and challenge. Have faith. Have that faith. In Luke's story this week, Jesus says, don't store up your faith, your hope in things that will rot and decay and fade away. Put your hope and your trust ultimately in the things of God and in this God who holds you. He speaks of the reign of God that will surround them and guide them and lead them and hold them in a new way. Don't put your faith and your trust in wealth and power and status and education. Those things will fade. Ultimately, put your trust in God. And this is a profound message for a world in which we live, a highly secularized and increasingly secular world where few believe in God or transcendence or this faith. And yet the stories of people like Father Kolbe and many others teach us that there is hope, there is faith, and there is a God who knows us and loves us and will hold us through the deepest, darkest times of life. And will save us when we can't save ourselves. This is the invitation into faith. What will you do?